Morning, everybody. So we've got the next event this morning. So this is Murder in the Highlands and Islands, and we've got Myra Duffy, Marsali and Helen Forbes. So you're in for a treat because this will be talking about like murder in your local, like the small towns. You're thinking of like Shetland and sort of like the Lewis trilogy and that kind of thing. You know, you don't know who your neighbours are, kind of style. So I'll leave it over to the ladies.
Well, I'm going to launch in here with our first topic to talk about. We represent quite different strands of styles of crime writing. Myra, you have a cosy amateur investigator on the Isle of Bute. Helen, you've got a grittier PP in Inverness and the islands. And I have a kind of maverick PI, I suppose, in Shetland of the medium school. So I was wondering why each of us have chosen the style of crime writing that we do and why our particular setting. So Myra, do you want to kick us off?
Unmute myself, sorry. I didn't actually choose the genre deliberately, to be honest. What happened was that I wrote a crime novel for the SAW. You know, I entered for the Scottish Association of Writers and it did really well. So I finished that and it was out there and I thought it was crime. I didn't realise there was a genre called cosy crime. And it was only when one of the reviewers said, oh, I enjoy a cosy crime novel, that I realised that what I was actually writing was cosy crime. So in a sense, I didn't choose the genre, it kind of chose me. But I find that's the genre I feel most comfortable in, to be honest. It's just the way that I write and the way the characters developed. I don't know about Helen, how did you?
Yes, similarly, I didn't really intend to write crime at all, but I wrote a short story that involved two young boys living on an unidentified island. And I was going to the Edinburgh Writers' Club at the time, and I took the story along to one of these nights where you read each other's work. And somebody said, oh, that would make a great novel, just to find out what happens to the two boys as they grow up. And just, you know, in my head, trying to think what might happen to them, I decided to make one of them policeman, and I won't say too much about the other one. But, you know, I probably chose, in a way, you know, gritty crime because that's what I like to read. I mean, I do enjoy cosy crime as well, all types of crime. We're just so fortunate that there are so many different types. But I do enjoy reading that kind of, you know, police procedurals that are fairly gritty and also watching them on television. Although I have to say I'm not terribly keen on very gory things. Although I like dark themes, I tend to leave much to the imagination. I get a bit freaked out myself if things are a bit too gory. I had to give up on a very well-known Scottish crime writer at his first novel, and much as I enjoyed it, I gave up when he had a character eat their own fingers. And I couldn't stand that. And there's another very well-known, even better known Scottish crime writer where I loved one of her novels, but at the start of each, she had a section that was to do with male sexual torture. And I found that I had to just skip. Luckily, it was in italics, so it was easy to skip that part. And I still enjoyed the novel, but just could not read the really, really gritty stuff. So although I do tend to very dark themes, they do leave much to the imagination, really. And what about yourself, Marsali?
Well, I would say I'm puzzle crime, and that's the sort I like. I grew up on the golden age ones, you know, Agatha Christie, John Dixon Carr particularly, and I love his stuff. I really enjoy the challenge of completely leading the reader up the garden path and then just flipping the whole thing over in a couple of sentences, and they go, "Oh, dash! I should have seen that."
I think it's often difficult, isn't it, with a genre, because sometimes even within the same genre of crime, you might want to write something different. You might want to write something that's a bit lighter or a bit darker. And sometimes readers' expectations kind of cause a little bit of a problem, because if you've got something that they like and you want to write something darker or something lighter, you do have to think quite hard about how you're going to approach it. Would you agree with that, Helen?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think in my first police procedural, there's quite a significant twist, and that caused difficulty in that when I was writing the second one, I felt that, you know, those who had enjoyed the twist might expect, you know, the same sort of pressure again for something similar, but I just wasn't coming up with it. So in the end, I wrote just a much more straightforward, you know, book with, it's obviously still got thrills and suspense and what have you, but just not the same level of thrill. But I did feel as if I was maybe letting people down, you know, which is a bit silly, because you just can't simply come up with the same formula and the same kind of twist every time, I think. But yeah, since then, I mean, I have 2 police procedural novels published, and since then I've written 3 psychological thrillers, which are quite different. So it's great to get away from it and do something different. Although I'm now planning a 3rd police procedural one in that series. But yeah, it's difficult to balance everything. I think, to balance your own wants and the reader's expectations, I think. So I just wonder. Sorry, carry on, Myra.
No, I'm just going to ask if you had, Marsali, if you had because you had a particular sailing background, you're really, really interested so much about sailing, and it gave a terrific atmosphere to the one that read Death on a Longship. So do you find readers expect that, or?
They're going to get it whether they expect it or not, because that's my passion, and it's my main character's passion. But I think it's something that people really enjoy about the book, the depiction of the sea. I had one lady come up to me and said I was the best describer of sea that she knew, and I thought, oh, that's a real compliment. And you know, the fun of sailing from the comfort of your armchair, I suppose. But yes, that's something I do enjoy bringing in. I try and factor it in when I'm planning each book, sailing somewhere.
Sailing.
Mm-hmm. It's very much a Shetland thing, because every house has its boat in the garden almost at this time of year, and they're all gradually migrating down towards the marinas now. And it was the old way of getting around. You know, roads as transport are really almost post 1950 on Shetland. Not altogether, but you know, right up till then, there was regular steamer services going right round the Isles.
Yeah. I just wondered, really, with both of you writing, fiction set in one particular place, do you live there? And if you don't, do you find that you travel there quite often to, just to help with their scene setting? What about you, Myra?
I divide my time between Bute and my home Bute and my home in Glasgow. So I try to do 50-50, although, of course, during the last year, that has been very difficult, if not impossible. So I do find that I need to be on the island for part of the time to be able to sort of fill in the background to the book. I know Wordsworth perhaps could lie on a couch and recollect it in tranquility, but I find that really it's much better to be there. And of course, I've got long associations with the island. Bute is an island, as you probably know, just off the west coast of Scotland. It's very accessible from Glasgow and other points west. And so it's a place where a lot of people have spent their holidays as children, which I did. And my husband's grandmother lived there. And so I feel that I know it well, but I do feel that every time I'm tackling a new book, I have to go there and I have to kind of steep myself in the atmosphere and the feeling of the island, because it's so different from the mainland. And while some of the concerns they mention, and it's important, and that's tremendous, because that kind of atmosphere, I think, is very important for the kinds of books that I write. So I would say, yes, it's important to be there. It's important to spend a lot of time for me. A lot of people can use Google Earth to great advantage, but I have to be there.
I seem to be losing sound here. But
no, it's my fault. I forgot to unmute. What about you, Marsali? I think you live in Shetland, do you?
I do live in Shetland. I grew up in Musselburgh, and went to school in Edinburgh, and then went to university in Dundee, and then I moved to Shetland as a very new, very green teacher, and I've stayed ever since.
Right.
More or less in the same house, which explains the books behind me. Yes, I think this is the only place that I know well enough to be able to write about. I know the community. I know the way things work. I wouldn't actually set a book in Lerwick because that's completely different. I'm most definitely country Shetland. There's no social structure here in the sense of social hierarchy, whereas I think Lerwick does have a sort of, old money class, if you like, but not in the country. Everybody is equal. I try in each of my books to set them in a slightly different area of Shetland because Shetland is much further away than most people think. And when I started writing, really nobody knew much about it at all. Now, of course, it's become much better known. Each area is slightly different, so I've tried to showcase different areas. But my cast's home territory is straight up the boat. It's sort of 6 miles away by boat and 15 by road. And I did deliberately set my stories up there because I don't know the people quite so well. Eighth is my area. And if I set it in Eighth, I would have real difficulty trying to cut out the people I know who live in a particular house. Whereas Bray, I can say hand on heart, don't know them, don't know who it was, used the name completely by accident, and so on. So yes, I do research, and that kind of feeds into the writing when I go to the place.
Right. Yes, I'm similarly. I spend a lot of time in the Outer Hebrides, and I live in Inverness, and my 2 published books have been set between those places. So, and I think you're right, Marsali. It's so important to know the place well, and I do find that I have to go over to the islands every so often just to make sure that I've got things right. At the moment, well, recently I finished a novel set in Edinburgh, and obviously because of lockdown I haven't been able to go there. And like you say, Myra, Google Earth is it's there and it's good, but it's not enough, and I'm just desperate to get to Edinburgh, even though the novel is the first draft or maybe second draft is finished. I just have a list of places I need to go, although I know Edinburgh well. I just feel I need to go there and just make sure that I've got it right, and get the atmosphere as well, because that makes a huge difference too.
I did use one book, Body in the Bracken, which has casts sailing down from Shetland to the West Highlands. And it's not a voyage I've actually done. Almost all of the others are. And so I spent ages, I looked up various lighthouses on Google and did the Google Earth looking down and going, that looks like a possible bay. And I had loads and loads of pilot books strewn all around me. And the big thing was that when I actually did that same voyage in a tall ship for the third book after that, then I felt as if I'd done it already. I was going, such and such. I pressed everybody all around me that I knew the names of all the hills that we were passing.
Definitely has its place. Although when I was writing In the Shadow of the Hill, part of it is set in Northton and Harris, and Google Earth had a huge big cloud over that area and you couldn't see a thing. So I had to rely on visiting.
That wasn't much help. Just following on from that, when you choose a real setting, how do you combine fact with fiction? I understand what you're saying, that in the sense that you don't want to be too close to reality. I mean, you don't want to offend people. How do you combine a real sense of place, but also to do the fiction? How do you do it, Helen?
I haven't found any difficulty really, particularly in the Inverness setting, because it's probably a big enough place not to worry too much about what Marsali mentioned about offending people and things like that. But I certainly prefer to write in a real setting. I think, I haven't tried writing in an imaginary place at all, because I find setting is just so important to my novels. And knowing a place is just, the setting is such a big part of the novel, I think, that I find that really important. So I can't say I found any great difficulty with combining the sort of factual place and fictional characters. I don't, I enjoy reading things that are set in a place that I know. So, and I think that most readers do enjoy that, especially if it's somewhere that hasn't often appeared in fiction. I think that that's one of the great benefits of using a real place, is that people really do enjoy, reading something, and maybe it's something exciting, set in that place. And yeah, I don't know. I don't particularly like where authors use the real place, like somebody recently used Inverness, but then made up lots of little villages round about with made up names, and I didn't really understand that at all. I think it really meant the person hadn't spent any time here, but decided just to have a different setting for their book. And I think you should either stick to a real place or an imaginary place, and maybe not combine the two. Occasionally I have introduced an imaginary pub or hotel or restaurant or something, just when I need to, but that's how I usually do it. What about you, Marsali?
In general, I do stick to real places, partly because I feel that the kind of murders I do are so improbable in Shetland that you have to have some sort of reality. And I hope that while the places are absolutely convincingly real, then I can get away with the mayhem I committed around them. I do tend to nick people's houses, I'm afraid. So most of the places that are in the stories you can visit, though the most recent one, then I had an old lady living in a cottage, which is it is now ruined. So the setting is all there, but I just rebuilt the cottage basically, and actually I think that was rather nice. It was a lovely little house by the time I'd finished with it. And I think it's not so much worrying about offending people as that I would find it really difficult with my imagination if I'm writing in a house I know really well, where I know the people, to move them out of that house and put somebody totally different in. So it's easier to use houses where you don't know the people. You just nick their house and hope they won't mind too much. I had fun with there's an absolutely gorgeous house called Belmont House on Unst, which is a baby Georgian mansion, and you can hire it. It's absolutely wonderful. You walk in and it's like going back 200 years. I wanted my 18th century costume for it, but our writers group went there for a weekend, and that was when I was plotting the book called Ghosts of the Vikings, which is mostly set there. And we had a wonderful time, and we investigated all the things like Cass hides in a cupboard in one point, so we found the youngest and most supple member of the group and put her in it to see if she could get in and close the door behind her, and that kind of thing. But then when we went back a year later, it was very strange, because in that year I'd lived in that house for the whole year, and I'd had my Cass's flamboyant French opera singer mother sweeping in and out of the place, and I'd had a couple of murders and a generally mad opera company and a ghost of a Viking, and to be back there, I kept expecting to see somebody coming past me from the story. So that was fun.
Well, I use Butte, of course, and on Butte I use a lot of real locations. In fact, I've also used the Islanders. I wrote a novella for Butte Noir a couple of years ago called Dark Deeds at Butte Noir, and so I asked quite a lot of people if they would be quite happy to be featured in it. So although the story and the characters and the murderer, of course, are not Islanders, there are a lot of people in the actual book. And that was just a bit of fun. I just really enjoyed doing that. I found that for some locations, I need to either invent or adapt. When I wrote Bad Blood at Rothesay Castle, I wanted to have a hotel nearby, but there isn't one that was sufficiently next to the castle to allow me to do it. So I used a building which is opposite Rothesay Castle, but isn't a hotel. But I was to kind of launch the book, and this woman came up at the end and she said, "I've come here today to find out where that hotel is. I've been all over the island and I can't find it. You'll have to tell me where it is." So I had to confess to her that it was actually a building opposite the castle, but it wasn't a hotel. I've also changed or adapted other names if there's a murder takes place, and sometimes I adapt in terms of because it's cozy crime, things that, as you've said, might never happen. I mean, they're quite ridiculous. For example, the site at St. Blaine's on the island which was 7th century monastic site, until it was ravaged by the Vikings, interestingly. That site in the Cave Mass at St. Lanes, I had it as base for a theme park, that someone had come and decided they were going to make a theme park out of it, you know, with places like the Devil's Ride and that kind of thing, which is quite ludicrous, of course. So I think I try to use real places, but very often the story is a little fantastical in that sense. So it doesn't mean it's something that could actually happen there. Hopefully that helps. But yes, it's good to use real location. It locates you, doesn't it, in the story?
Mm-hmm. You're mentioning using the islanders, and I did that with one book, Death in Shetland Waters. I used an entire ship's crew, apart from the officers who were the main suspects. But it was a research trip, honest. I joined the Norwegian tall ship Sørlandet, who is a real ship. This is Cass's ship in the series. And we did a voyage from Kristiansand to Stavanger, and then down through the Orkney Channel, Pentland Firth, and down to Belfast. So that entire voyage was absolutely real. I spent the entire time with a notebook, you know, scribbling "the moon looks gorgeous" and that kind of thing. And I was on one of the watches, and my fellow watchmates were absolutely wonderful. It turned out that Kristiansand's in Life and Social Work had decided to send 50 young adults, really, on board the ship as trainees, as help for them. You know, they were a real mixed bunch. We were all the nations, but they were absolutely wonderful. It was such a delight spending time with them, you know, standing my watch and climbing the rig and waking each other up in the morning and eating brownies at midnight on deck. And so I went round all of them and said, "May I use you in my book?" So they're all real. They're all there.
That's an excellent
have you used real people, Helen? Have you used real people?
I haven't actually. I can't think. I mean, I have written some historical fiction. It's unpublished, set in St Kilda, and I based one character there, just a very minor character, on somebody that I knew who had some interesting characteristics, but I've never admitted who it was, and probably never will. I think actually the real person may be deceased now anyway, but no, I haven't. I mean, obviously you combine traits and characteristics from different people, but I haven't used any real people like that. It's certainly something you know, to think about, and I love that idea of using the whole crew like Marsali. That's great.
The ship just wouldn't have been the same without them, because they were just so much. And I wish our councils would do the same with children who are struggling, because it was wonderful for them. There was one lass who came on. I had my teacher's hat on, of course, as I watched them all assemble down below the ship. And there was one lass who had like a policewoman's hat pulled down over her face, and then a kind of big Bob Marley kind of hearthrug jacket thing, and what you could see in between was scowl. And I thought, you've got the right one there. And within, I think, a day and a half, she discovered that a tall ship is the best playground you can possibly have. You get put on a harness and go right up into the sky. And she had the most beautiful smile. And within 2 days, she was not only doing all the work on her own watch, but she was coming and joining all the other watches. I think she just gave up on sleep. And you thought, well, for that child, that was maybe a life changer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Still on setting, I was wondering if there's particular aspects of your setting that you enjoy working into your fiction, or if there are any minor crusades that you're on in your fiction, like, for example, Helen, maybe tarnishing the tartan image of
yeah, I mean, I think obviously if you're right in a rural area in the Highlands and Islands, you know, you've got so much scope for you know, lovely description and beautiful areas. And I do take quite a perverse pleasure in setting nasty deeds in beautiful areas as well sometimes. But as for crusades, I think probably the main crusade, and I think it probably is one of the reasons I started writing fiction set in the Highlands and Islands, is this sort of stupid tuchter image, you know, this kind of image that people in the Highlands and Islands are stupid. And I always remember a long time ago watching an episode of Taggart where somebody said something silly, or a suspect came up with something silly, and one of the policemen said, "You wouldn't get a jury in Benbecula to believe that." And that always stuck with me. I thought, why pick an area, an island, and say, imply that people are stupid? And I've read quite a lot of fiction since then that does, continue that kind of myth. So I think that was one of the reasons I started writing in the first place. And my first novel was set, between North Uist and St Kilda. And again, that was to do with the reason I was very interested in St Kilda and still am, but I was really didn't like the way the early writers wrote about the St Kildan people either, because they wrote about them as if they were these, either they were complete savages living in this completely savage area, or they were these very romanticized people living in this lovely little island, neither of which was true. And so that's probably my main sort of crusade about writing set in the Highlands, to try and kind of dispel that kind of image. But certainly, like you say, the Kuthi Highlander image is something else that you might want to try and displace too. Yeah. What about you, Myra?
Well, I'm particularly interested in the history and the geography of the island. I think people don't understand that these islands in past Scottish history were very important. I mean, Bute was the Stuart stronghold. The High Stewards of Scotland and the Stuart line, actually, they are part of the Student line. And so Rosslea Castle was their stronghold. And there is so much history, because remember, most of the islands were had associated with them, very powerful chieftains. And so I like to incorporate a good bit of the history. Now, it's not to say that I always take it terribly seriously. For example, when I wrote Endgame at Port Bannatyne, that was about a film crew coming to make the story of the life of James Hamilton of Kames Castle, which is situated just at the end of Port Bannatyne. And he was a very interesting character. He was an Edinburgh lawyer in the 1800s, and he had Kames Castle. He was very well known. His grave is on the island, and it's a typical Victorian grave with the railings around it to stop grave robbers. But the interesting thing about it is that he's buried standing up. The local story is that he's buried standing up, so that in Resurrection Day, when he rises, the first thing you'll see is his beloved Kames Castle and the waters of Kames Bay. So I like to try and incorporate that kind of detail into the stories. So I think almost all the stories are based or have a base in some format in a different area of the island. Deadly Secrets at the Standing Stones is one of the ones where obviously the standing stones are very important on Bute. There are many scattered throughout the Highlands and Islands, and the kind of myths that are associated with those. So that is my practice in developing understanding of the history and the geography, because the Highland line runs right through the middle of Bute, of Rosslea. And you can stand with one foot in the lowlands and one in the Highlands if you stand just outside the old winter gardens, which are now the tourist office. So these kind of snippets are the things that I really like to sort of promote in terms of the interest in the Highlands and Islands. What about yourself, Marsali? What do you feel?
Well, yes, I started out in a kind of crusade, because when I first moved up Shetland, it doesn't happen so much now, but when I went south, the first question people would say was, "But what do you find to do with yourself up there?" And occasionally they'd swing in, "Is it really fair on Marnie?" That was my daughter, who was 3 when we moved. "Is it really fair for Marnie taking her? What does she find to do with herself up there?" And I thought, good grief, if you only knew. Between sailing all summer and drama festival in the winter and appearing at a pantomime near you as, I think I started off as Prince Charming, and I was 45 before I was finally allowed to be the princess. Obviously school teaching those days. But, you know, there's agricultural shows and there's Uphelia in every district. And quite honestly, you know, I don't know what you people down south want to do with yourselves down there. And as for facilities, well, you know, again, people say things like, oh, do you have electricity? Yes, we have electricity. We actually have a higher broadband, not broadband, what were the round things you used to get? Satellite dishes. We used to have a higher satellite dish per head than anywhere in the country. You know, the education, well, most of the classes I taught were learning in groups of 15. I remember once having 20 in the class and being not sure how I was going to fit them all in. Beautiful new school, more technology than I ever wanted anywhere near me. The school, right next to the school, there's a leisure centre. Now, I have poor grandchildren from London, poor things, and they came up 2 Octobers ago to visit Granny, and they came up in the school holidays. So I just took them down to the leisure centre, and they saw what was on for the school holidays. They had all sorts of things. So they signed up for the splash disco and the roller disco and the fun on wheels and the climbing wall. And at the first one, they met other village children. And after that, we didn't see them for a week. They just disappeared. They were in and out of houses. They didn't have to arrange play dates. They didn't have to be escorted to the leisure centre. They just, every so often, this large group of 10 to 14-year-olds would kind of sweep into the house, raid the biscuit tin, terrify the cats, play it back later, and sweep out again to do the same in somebody else's house. And they had a wonderful, wonderful time. And it was just like they'd never done before. They could go down to the shore, they could go up on the hill, you know, total freedom, and a leisure centre with its own climbing wall in a village of 250 people. Eyes me out of here with a crowbar. So I had fun with my various books, showcasing things like A Handful of Ashes set at Halloween, which is, so there's all the kind of stuff that children get up to, like kale casting. The Body in the Bracken ends with one of the Uphelias, the first one of the year in Scalloway, where the boat is burnt on the water. But I also wanted to try and use as themes the kind of things that matter to us in the country, like the council threatening to close all the junior high schools, or this wonderful idea that IAL has got that all air traffic would be best directed from, is it Dundee or is it Inverness they've gone for? Or, you know, instead of having somebody on the ground at somewhere to say, it's rather foggy down here, I think you should turn back. Or, things like we're having a major wind farm, which has wormed its way into my next book. All that sort of thing, the things that folk in town maybe don't think about as important to us in the country. The drain of jobs towards Lerwick, the fight to keep the country shops open. That's the kind of things that matter to us up here.
Gosh, sounds like there's no shortage of inspiration.
Only I have the time to get on and write it.
Like I mentioned earlier, I think that, you know, people like to read, you know, fiction set in their own home area. But I just wondered with both of you how your writing has been received in your local area and what kind of feedback you've had. Myra?
I've been very, very grateful for the support that I've had. There's a wonderful bookshop there called Print Point, and Karen, who runs it there, has been absolutely terrific in terms of supporting me with different kinds of book events and signings and stocking my books. I'm very lucky. She has told me that my books sell more than any other crime writer in the shop, so that's actually quite nice to know. And the Islanders themselves have been very supportive, very interested in what's going on. Of course, there now is well, maybe not this year, but there's a Butte Noir festival, and that's been really, really successful. So all these things are a great help. And as I say, the Butte Museum, the Rochdale Library, all these, the Ettrick Bay Tea Room even, have all been tremendously supportive of the writing. So I'm very grateful for that, because I think that gives you a kind of gives you a kind of to work, because you know that people are interested, that they're enjoying reading them, and it encourages you greatly. I mean, I think it would be awful if you wrote something set in a particular place and found that the local people hated it. I think that would be very difficult to continue with. So I've been very lucky, and I say I'm very grateful for all the support that I've had. How about the rest of you? How do you feel?
Well, I'm like you.
Marsali, do you?
We have a wonderful local bookshop here who are great promoters of my work, and they're absolutely lovely for letting me just come, and if we know that there's going to be maybe 2 or 3 cruise ships in, and so thousands, literally thousands of tourists wandering around Lerwick, you know, because the big ones can maybe have 3,000 people in them, so they let me come and set up shop for the day in a corner of the bookshop and just buttonhole innocent tourists who head over to the leave shelves saying, if you like crime writing, would you like to try mine? And even if they wouldn't, then, you know, I'm also a tourist guide, so I can point them to places to go, and quite often they end up buying a book anyway. So that's wonderful. Our local library is absolutely fantastic for letting you phone them up and say, I've got a new book coming out, what can we do? And by the way, it's Jane Austen's bicentenary of her death. Can we have a fun event for that? So we all dressed up as Jane Austen characters and had competitions like who was the best Mr. Darcy. So they're always up for something fun. Anne Cleves, of course, is an incredibly hard act to follow. Her books are superb, but I have had people say that they enjoy mine as much, local people, because it's a different facet of Shetland. It's an insider's view of the country, if you like. And occasionally somebody sidles up to me and says, I don't know if I should say this. Actually, I like your books better than Anne. And I say, no, it's fine, it's fine. Also, I was absolutely delighted and honoured to be the library's most borrowed last year. You know, they draw up these league tables. So I was top of the Shetland books, and I got beaten by one which I must read about people delivering. It was a kind of Pony Express for library books in the West, and I can't remember the name of it. Came out last year, and it was people in the West of America, and they delivered books, library books by ponies out to the rural areas further west. Yeah, somebody in the audience, I hope, will know the book I'm telling me about.
I'm afraid I don't.
But that beat me because it was on Audible. So that was that. Local praise is the best of all.
That's great to have had that, both of you to have had that support locally, and I think I've probably had the same thing here in Inverness. Certainly Waterstones in Inverness were just fantastic, particularly with the first book. You know, it stayed in their top 10 for a long time, and you know, I often was in the shop and they didn't necessarily know I was there, and I would hear them recommending it to people. So, you know, that was really great. And the library as well, the library were excellent. And it was a real highlight for me to be travelling across to Uist on the ferry, on Calmac ferry, and see the books in the shop on the ferry. So that was wonderful too. So I think it makes such a difference.
I'm still fighting that one. I've had several shots at saying, wouldn't you like to take my book? It seems to be the sort of thing where everybody says, oh, that's not my department, you have to go to them. And they say, oh, no, it's not me, it's somebody else. So I'm just now saying to all my friends, please ask for them when you're on the boat.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Mine are no longer on the boat, but that's probably because it's quite some time since they were published. But yeah, I think the more people that ask, the better chance you have. Yeah.
So, confession time here. Do you two both, if you go into a big bookshop and see your books in a corner, quietly bring them out and put them on the table?
I've never done that, but friends of mine quite often do that. Yeah.
That's one way of doing it, isn't it? Could I, thinking about the books, and we've talked about several books, we're quite often told as right, it pays to have, because readers really like that, you know, once they read one, and that very often, if you're planning a series, you should have the second book ready so that when people buy the first one, the second one can be out fairly quickly. what do you think are the kind of benefits and the pitfalls of a series, Helen? What do you think about the benefits and the pitfalls of a series?
It's certainly, I'm certainly in a different position from both of you, in that I have only written 2 books in the series, whereas you both seem to be steaming away with a significant number. I don't think, even when I wrote the first one, I initially didn't know that I would write a follow-up. However, it became clear while I was writing it that there were so many unfinished, sort of loose ends, that I did need to write a second one. And thereafter, I kind of ground to a halt and started to write other things. And I should maybe answer one of the questions just now, that the 3 psychological thrillers I mentioned are not yet published, sadly, but I hope to have news about one of them shortly. But going back to the series thing, my worries about it, I suppose, are I wonder how many ideas I could come up with for the same characters. But I know other people do it, and you've both done it very successfully. So obviously it can be done. But I do wonder. I've got some ideas for a third one, which I'm hoping to start working on next. But I can't think further ahead than that, and that's a bit of a worry for me. So I wonder how you both manage, to do that, to deal with that aspect.
And I love that you've got the characters all established and ready to go. I wouldn't say I work terribly far ahead. At the moment, I've got no ideas for the next book after the one that I'm almost finished, which is reasonably unusual, because normally by the time I'm this stage in one book, then I'm starting to look ahead to the next one. I think what I do try and make sure that my books are very firmly self-standing from the point of view of the story. So the series characters are not involved in the actual murder in general. They're used as, can you find out a bit about so-and-so, like Cass's older friend Magni, or her young friend Inga, who is involved in the mothers and toddlers and such like. There is a very slow-growing love story. I think it took 4 books for their first hits. And my London agent tried to hurry me up a bit and say, well, can't he take her hand at this point? And I said, Scottish. And she said, well, maybe he could whisper something nice in her ear. And I said, no, he's Scottish. You'd die of embarrassment, rather. I'm afraid he is rather a conventional tutor, actually. I think what I find difficult is having to keep giving the same information over and over again. So I think anybody who read, say, book 7 in the series might not actually find out what Cass looked like, because there are only so many times you can start each book with, I had a look in the mirror and saw that my dark hair was untidy as usual, and my blue eyes, and I absolutely love the Miss Silver book, Patricia Wentworth. But every time Miss Silver is introduced, you get a complete description of the walnut-carved armchairs with the wide laps and the black bruns. Yeah. And so I'm desperate not to do that. I think I overdo it in the other direction. And I think the other thing is almost trying not to get too much to happen to my Cass, because then you have so much backstory that you have to give the reader. So I do prefer to let them just get in. I remember reading, I think it was the 21st in a series by a very good author. But by the time I'd got to about chapter 4, I was going, so hang on a minute. His current wife was the one he was unfaithful with to his first wife, who died in a car crash, and then he had a second wife in between who died of cancer, and this is her brother-in-law who is married to his niece. And I lost the story entirely in among, and I know that readers want to catch up with the people in the series, but you have to make sure the story is the really, really important thing. So I try and be sparing with which characters I use in which book, and not have them all appearing at once.
It is quite difficult, I think, to keep a series going, because exactly as you describe, you don't want to have too much backstory, and you don't want to have too much about the character. I got round my main character Alison, but I'm really not describing her very much at all. I kind of leave it to the reader's imagination. So if you ask me what she looked like, I would only have the vaguest idea, because that in a way helps. I didn't intend to write a series. I wrote the first one, The House at Ettrick Bay, and it was really well received. So I wrote a second, and then that went well. So I wrote a third, etc. And I do enjoy writing them. The subtext I have is the relationship between Alison and her husband, Simon. He goes off to Washington to work, and it's whether, in fact, they're going to stay together or they're going to divorce, or what's going to happen. And in Endgame at Port Bannatyne, someone else comes on the scene, someone from her past who she rather likes, and there's a bit of a free song there about whether she will in fact leave Simon. So that's the kind of subtext right through the series. But again, I think it's important, as you say, that each one stands individually, and you don't have this business of people having to think, wait a minute, what happened in book one? Because I think that's really it's quite hard and it's quite destructive. So I try to make them as freestanding as possible, although the locations always come in many of the same locations come in. But I do think that can be a pitfall. The benefit is, I do think that the readers that read my books like series, and although it's very hard when you've just written one and published it and people have bought it, and then they come on and say, and when is the next one coming out? And you've only written the prologue or chapter one. So that's quite tricky.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I see we've got some questions now. I wonder if we should maybe read some of those. So I'm just seeing that Leela has asked, would any of you authors write other genres than crime? Marsali?
Well, I started my writing career with two historical novels. Georgette here has a lot to answer for, and she's still a secret author. And I've also written an incredibly long and very detailed history of women's suffrage in Shetland. I edited the diaries of a wonderful lady that I knew as a child who had been an ambulance driver on the Russian front in World War I, with the Elsie Ingalls Scottish Women's Hospital Unit. So that's published as Forgotten Heroines. I think that's about it. Yeah. So it's fun trying other things. But I'm also having fun seeing what Cass is going to do next.
Yes, I know what you mean. Myra?
I started out writing, believe it or not, management training books. I've written 16 of those. One set for small organizations like charities, and one for small businesses, because that was kind of my other life, before I was writing full time. But I've also written a children's book set in Butte, and I've got an idea for follow-up to that, just haven't had time to do it. I've written a romantic suspense set in riding stables in Dumbarton. I've written a contemporary women's fiction called The Lunch Club at George Square, set in Glasgow. And I've got on the stocks a couple of books which I've not quite finished, which are different. And then I've got a new series which I've started, not yet published, which features a young journalist, which is set in Glasgow, but that is crime. So I planned to keep me busy during lockdown. If only I'm going to come out of lockdown and say, oh, what did I do with all those days? Why didn't I spend more time writing?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I can't believe how much you two have diversified. That's amazing. And I started with this novel that was set in St Kilda, but it was a huge novel, and the first half was set in modern day North Uist, and the second half in 18th century St Kilda. And I wrote that for years, worked on that for years, and eventually I realised it was far too long. So it's now 2 novels, which I've never managed to get published, but we'd dearly love to. So one is really contemporary women's fiction set in North Uist, and the other one is a historical fiction. And I think I'd love to do more historical fiction. I love research, and I would really enjoy that, I think. But for the time being, I think I'm probably stuck on crime at the moment anyway, for the foreseeable future. And Myra, just what you mentioned about lockdown, I noticed that Chris has written a question saying, has the lockdown because of COVID affected your writing? For example, have you written more or written less during lockdown, Myra?
Well, the last lockdown, I think I wrote less. I wrote the one that was out at Christmas, that one, The Bridesale Affair, and I really struggled with it. I really struggled with it. I don't know why. I just found it difficult to do. I found it difficult to get into. And in fact, in the end, I had to do an almost total rewrite. This time, no, I'm well on the way. I'm halfway through the new Butte novel. I've got other things that I've been writing, and it's not been nearly as difficult. And I think it's because I've been quite strict with myself this time. And I've made sure that every day I do so many words. I've just absolutely, no matter what's happened, no matter what else I have to do. And of course, we've all been a bit the same about lockdown. We've actually been quite busy between Zoom calls and online events and festivals. Last weekend, for example, was the Scottish Association of Writers conference all weekend. You know, so really, it's not as though you've nothing else to do, but it's just motivating yourself and keeping motivated. And I think being with another group of writers online very often helps, because you hear what other people are doing and it kind of motivates you a bit. So that's my lockdown so far.
What about you, Marsali?
Well, my lockdown was a funny one. I had an infection in my pelvis post bowel cancer operation, and they were hoping to let me away with not having to get a stoma bag, but it turned out that the infection was moving into my bones, so they were going to have to do something. And in the year before that, I really wasn't getting any writing done, partly because I had this raging fever the whole time, and partly because I couldn't sit down for very long because it hurt. So my op came up, and I was the last stop in Aberdeen Hospital. And they were kind of clearing the wards around me, ready for COVID. And of course, my husband couldn't visit. And eventually, I think Wednesday is the day we're going to be celebrating me getting home again after a month in hospital. So I missed out on the whole COVID thing. I got the occasional phone call from my daughter in London saying they've closed the schools now and there's no toilet paper. And my husband gave me a kind of running commentary on how everything in Aberdeen was closing down, and he had to queue outside shops to get food. But I didn't actually see any of it because there wasn't Wi-Fi in the hospital. I'd assumed that there would be. They only have these funny things that you pull around in front of yourself that cost a bomb. So I'd taken my laptop, and it was only when they actually gave us a Wi-Fi link, and that was kind of 2 weeks after lockdown started, and I was able to see the news and go, how many people are dying each day? So it was very strange. I still feel as I haven't quite done lockdown, and then I got flown straight home by air ambulance and met by a wheels ambulance, and then there's not an awful lot of COVID here in Shetland. So after that, life was kind of normal, actually. You know, I got my boat going again, and nobody actually said you may not go into the marina, so we just ignored that one. I walked down to the marina and went out for a sail, and it was actually a lovely, peaceful summer. But even having said that, yeah, I did find it awfully hard to concentrate, and fighting my way back into the book that hadn't gone very well. I think it got a rewrite after my agent had read it, and another one, I mean, big major rewrite after my publisher had seen it. And we hope we're all happy with it now. But this one is a dream. This one, I'm missing grandchildren, and I'm missing nipping out to the school to do drama. So it's filled with children who are pretending to be trows and sneaking about at night without their parents knowing, and leaving footprints in the snow. I'm having a ball with this one.
Oh, that sounds lovely, but not your experience. That sounds quite horrendous. So
I'm better now, glory be. So I'm just looking forward to getting up and going.
Absolutely. Well, I found I actually had 2 jobs up until the end of last January, and they were both so busy that I decided one had to go, so I gave up the more secure of the jobs, although I preferred the other job, and it's better paid. And then of course lockdown came and I had no work and no income, just for a period of 3 months until they got things in place so that you could work from home. So I spent that 3 months just writing non-stop on my work in progress at that time, and it was a little manic. I felt that I was just, I was writing morning, noon and night, but I loved the experience of writing full time, and if it paid, I'd certainly do that. And I didn't, obviously there were, in the background there were concerns and issues about COVID and everything awful that was going on, but I was really grateful to have something to completely switch off to. I don't know how other people cope then and now if they don't write, because I don't know what else I would do with myself. I mean, I'm back to working now, and usually work maybe 3 to 4 days a week, and then write the rest of the time. But I must say I find it fantastic, and I've never had that sustained period of that 3 months to work on one particular book. And I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, that's not to say that I wish, none of this had happened and that I wish we were back to normal, but, it's been great to be able to make the most of having this time and to have a few less commitments, I think, and less sort of, family visits and things that I would have normally done. I mean, I'm missing, obviously, going out with friends and, having meals and what have you, meeting up with people, but I have quite enjoyed the extra time for writing, I must say. Yeah.
Good. That's Lindsay.
Oh, here's Lindsay.
Yeah, just to let you know, they've just got 4 minutes left.
Right.
If there's anybody else got any more questions for them, or it's just been really interesting to hear about like how different authors how in like the Highlands Islands it's always about setting and that seems to be really driven. The character's important, but the setting always seems to be like a character itself. So like Bute, Inverness, US, Shetland, they always seem to be about as big a character as the actual characters themselves.
I think that's right. I've always felt that, particularly in The Shadow of the Hill, Harris was almost like a character in it, and a lot of people said that. But I have heard other writers say that's just a ridiculous thing to say, and that it's not a character and it can't be. But it is a huge part of your book, isn't it? And,
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it because it informs the lives of the characters. So I mean, where you look at the way you go about. Yes, in particular, I think if you live in an island, which is a kind of closed community or a small community of any kind, really. Then, as I say, the concerns and everything are different from larger places. So yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, it's also a different sort of lifestyle. I mean, one of my oldest friends lives in Stornoway. I was to say Shetland, no, Stornoway, and like her mum would like during the day they wouldn't lock the doors and that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously at night they would, but it's just a completely different life there. I mean, you can just I mean, I've obviously read all 3 of your books and love them, and it's just a completely different. Everybody knows everybody, and it's just completely like far different from like living in Edinburgh or Glasgow, where you just wouldn't know your next door neighbour, or you wouldn't know the person down the street. There, you could go out the door and say hello to everybody. Like a 5-minute walk could probably take a 10-minute walk, because you say hello Jim, hello Annie kind of style. I mean, it's like here I live in Fife, and it's like that as well. I mean, I can go down the street to the butcher's, and then my mum's like, you only left about you left about an hour ago, where have you been? And I'm like, you end up speaking to people, because I mean, you just don't. I mean, I just don't. I'm always working, so I just don't see people, and it's either on buses or it's like going down to the Co-op, and then you end up like chatting to folk, and you're like, people must be thinking, where the heck is this girl gone? But it's just that kind of thing where everybody knows everybody kind of style, and they all know your business, so they all know. They all know about people in Newborough, like people that I worked with and stuff, all know about this, and see them in person and go, oh, hello Lindsay, how's the book festival coming on? Like, and you're like, because they follow you on Facebook or they know what you're doing, and you're like, okay, that's a bit strange, but that's the kind of way things go. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing, but just to let you all know, I know that there's a bookshop in Stornoway that sells Helen's books, because when I used to go up to visit, that's how I first got Helen's books. I know that the Perth Library also has Helen's first 2 books, because my friend, one of my neighbours who used to work there, she now works for the Fife Library, but she was like, oh, Helen Forbes. I was like, I know her, Helen, yeah. I know that Dundee Library has Marsali's books, because I have actually borrowed some of hers, And Myra's, I think Dundee does hers as well. I know I've actually seen Myra's in Fife Library in Glenrothes, and I've seen them in Cooper, I think, as well. Local libraries, so sort of quite impressed with that, because sometimes if they're not the big names like Val McDermid and all that, you just don't, the libraries will not stock them. But I got to give a lot of them credit, like the ones near me, personally. A lot of them have like, I don't know if it's maybe because like for Perth, it's like they always called it the gateway to the Highlands, so they probably take a lot of like, I think probably the same maybe like, you know, Dundee as well, you know, that they like, and it probably maybe people have asked for them as well, kind of style. But yeah, so to know, like, you know, your books are actually, you know, not just bookshops but in libraries, and you can see people getting them because obviously you see who's had them before, and they are really, really popular. So yeah, so that is
Good
1
to hear,
o'clock. So I'm
Lucy.
just gonna
Okay.
definitely. So I'm just gonna. So that's 1 o'clock, guys. Thank you so much, everybody, for
Thank you
tuning
very
in
much,
and taking
Lindsay.
part. So the next,
Thank you.
Thank
the
you very
next
much.
one is Deadly is the Female. Thank you.
Thank you again. Right,
Is
Lindsay.
Deadly is the
Thank you,
Female
Marsali.
at 3 o'clock.
Well, thank you.
To 4
Lovely
o'clock.
to meet all
Thank
three of
you.
you.
I'd love to meet you. Bye.
Bye.
Yes, thank you, everyone. It's great.
Bye.
Oh, and thank you, Chris, for buying my book.
So the next one is Deadly is the Female, 3 to 4, and that's Wendy H. Jones, Tana Collins, and Christine Lawrenson. So another author there that's new to one of the panels. So that'll be quite an interesting one, and that is, it's called Deadly is the Female. So that'll be another interesting one. I love hearing like the twisted minds of female writers, because you think, oh, a man writer can write about gory murders, but a woman can be just a bit as good, I think, even better sometimes. But I'll just end the broadcast.